The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Willowbrook Hotel's ballroom sparkled like 1,000 stars, their light reflecting off Emma Harrison's tear-stained face as she stood frozen in disbelief. The annual Charleston Charity Gala, usually the highlight of South Carolina's social calendar, had just become the scene of her most devastating humiliation. "I'm sorry, Emma," Alexander Pierce said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. "But I never loved you. It was all a game, a necessary move to save my family's company." His cold blue eyes showed no remorse as he stood beside Victoria Blackwood, the daughter of Pierce Industries' biggest competitor. Emma's hands trembled as she held the champagne glass, her emerald green gown, the one she'd spent months saving for as a junior architect at Morrison & Associates, suddenly feeling like it was suffocating her. The whispers around her grew louder, the faces of Charleston's elite morphing from shock to pity to barely concealed amusement. "Did you really think someone like him would choose someone like you?" Victoria's perfectly painted lips curled into a cruel smile. "Darling, you were just a stepping stone. My father's about to merge Blackwood Enterprises with Pierce Industries, and Alexander knew exactly what he needed to do to make it happen." The past 18 months flashed through Emma's mind like a cruel montage: the accidental meeting at the coffee shop where she'd been sketching building designs, the whirlwind romance, the promises of forever, and the engagement ring that now felt like it was burning through her finger. Every tender moment had been calculated, every kiss a lie. Margaret Harrison, Emma's grandmother and the only family she had left after losing her parents in a car accident years ago, stepped forward from the crowd. "Emma, honey, hold your head high," she whispered, trying to reach for her granddaughter's arm. But Emma couldn't stay. Not here. Not with 300 pairs of eyes watching her fall apart. She turned and ran, her heels clicking against the marble floor, ignoring the calls of her best friend, Sarah Thompson, who tried to follow her. Outside, the Charleston night air was thick with humidity, but Emma couldn't breathe. She fumbled with her car keys, her vision blurred by tears. Behind her, she could hear the murmur of voices as people spilled onto the hotel's grand entrance, hungry for more drama. "Emma, wait." Sarah's voice cut through the night. "Don't drive like this. Let me take you home." But Emma was already in her car, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles turned white. As she drove through the historic streets of Charleston, past the antebellum mansions and swaying palm trees, her mind raced with questions. How could she have been so blind? The late nights Alexander claimed to be working, the mysterious phone calls, the way he always steered their dates away from certain parts of town, it all made sense. Now. She pulled up to her modest apartment above an old bookstore in the historic district, the place she'd loved for its character but Alexander had always subtly criticized. Now, even this sanctuary felt tainted by his presence. Inside, Emma collapsed onto her vintage sofa, her grandmother's worried voice leaving message after message on her phone. But she couldn't talk to anyone. Not yet. Not when the reality of her situation was sinking in like a stone in the Charleston harbor. It wasn't just her heart that was broken. Alexander had known about the prestigious Thompson Architecture Prize she'd been competing for, a grant that would have launched her career. Somehow, her innovative designs for sustainable urban housing had been leaked to a competitor. She'd lost the prize last week, and now she knew why. Victoria's cousin was on the selection committee. As the first rays of dawn crept through her window, Emma sat at her small drafting table, her sketchbook open to a blank page. Her entire life's trajectory had been carefully planned: win the Thompson Prize, become a partner at Morrison & Associates by 30, revolutionize sustainable architecture in the South. Now, at 27, she felt like she was starting from zero. But as she picked up her pencil, something shifted inside her. The lead touched the paper, and instead of architectural drawings, she began writing. Every betrayal, every manipulation, every moment of truth that she'd been too in love to see, it all poured out onto the page. A knock at her door startled her. Sarah stood there, holding a paper bag from their favorite bakery and wearing the determined expression that had gotten them through countless all-nighters in architecture school. "You're not alone in this," Sarah declared, setting down coffee and fresh croissants. "And you're not finished. The Emma Harrison I know doesn't let anyone write her story for her." Emma looked at her best friend, then down at the pages she'd filled with her raw emotions. The sun was now fully up, painting Charleston in its golden morning light. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and felt something new rising from the ashes of her humiliation, determination. "You're right," Emma said, her voice stronger than she expected. "This isn't the end of my story. It's just the beginning." What she didn't know then was just how right she was. The path ahead would test every ounce of her strength, challenge everything she thought she knew about love and loyalty, and lead her to a destiny far greater than anything Alexander Pierce could have given or taken from her. But first, she would have to face the storm that was already gathering on the horizon, a storm that would shake the very foundations of Charleston's most powerful families. The morning after the gala disaster, Emma's face was splashed across every society blog in Charleston. Architecture's Cinderella loses her prince read one headline, Pierce-Blackwood merger, the real love story, declared another. Each article seemed to take particular delight in describing her public humiliation in excruciating detail. "Don't read that trash," Sarah insisted, snatching Emma's phone away during their impromptu breakfast. "They don't know the real you, or what you're capable of." But it wasn't just the social humiliation that worried Emma. That morning, she'd received an email from Jonathan Morrison himself, requesting her presence at the firm. As she walked into Morrison & Associates' gleaming office building downtown, wearing her most professional navy suit like armor, she could feel the stares and whispers following her. "Miss Harrison," Jonathan Morrison's voice was grave as she entered his corner office. The distinguished architect, with his silver hair and intimidating reputation, had been her mentor since she joined the firm 3 years ago. "I assume you know why I've called you here." Emma's heart sank. "Mr. Morrison, what happened at the gala has nothing to do with my work here." "You're right," he interrupted, surprising her. "It doesn't. But losing the Thompson Prize to Victoria Blackwood's cousin under such suspicious circumstances has created a situation we need to address." He paused, studying her with keen eyes. "The Blackwood-Pierce merger means they'll be our biggest competitors in the sustainable architecture sector. We can't afford any conflicts of interest." "Are you firing me?" Emma's voice wavered slightly, but she held her ground. Morrison's expression softened slightly. "No, Emma. I'm transferring you to our New York office. It's a fresh start, away from all this drama. Taylor Matthews, our managing partner there, specifically requested you after seeing your Thompson Prize submission." Emma sat stunned. New York? Leave Charleston, her grandmother, her whole life? Before she could respond, Morrison's phone buzzed. "Sir," his assistant's voice crackled through the speaker, "Mr. James Crawford is here to see you. He says it's urgent." Morrison frowned. "James Crawford? From Crawford Development?" He looked at Emma apologetically. "We'll continue this discussion later. Take the day to think about New York." As Emma left Morrison's office, she nearly collided with a tall, dark-haired man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit. James Crawford, the notorious black sheep of Charleston's old money Crawford family, known for breaking away from his family's traditional real estate empire to build sustainable, affordable housing projects. "I'm so sorry," Emma stammered, steadying herself. James caught her arm, helping her regain her balance. His green eyes widened with recognition. "You're Emma Harrison." It wasn't a question. "I saw your Thompson Prize submission. The vertical garden integration was brilliant." Before Emma could respond, Victoria Blackwood's voice cut through the office like a knife. "James, darling. What a surprise." She sauntered over, wearing a dress that probably cost more than Emma's monthly salary. "I didn't expect to see you here, or anywhere in polite society, really." James's expression hardened. "Victoria. Still riding on Daddy's coattails, I see. Or is it Alexander Pierce's now? I lose track." Victoria's perfect smile faltered slightly. "At least I know how to maintain my family's legacy, unlike some people." Speaking of which, she turned to Emma with false sympathy. "I heard Morrison shipping you off to New York. Probably for the best, don't you think? Some people just aren't cut out for Charleston's standards." Emma felt something snap inside her. All the hurt, humiliation, and anger of the past 24 hours crystallized into a strange, cold clarity. "You're right, Victoria. Some people aren't cut out for maintaining appearances at the expense of their souls. Thankfully, I'm not one of them." She turned to James, whose eyes were dancing with barely suppressed amusement. "Mr. Crawford, I'd love to hear your thoughts on vertical garden integration sometime. When you're not busy with your meeting, of course." "How about now?" James replied smoothly. "I suddenly find my morning unexpectedly free. Coffee?" They left Victoria standing there, her perfect composure finally cracking. As they walked to the elegant little cafe around the corner, Emma felt lighter than she had in days. But she wasn't prepared for what James was about to tell her. Over coffee, James revealed the real reason for his visit to Morrison and Associates. The Thompson Prize wasn't just about architecture, Emma. It was about land, specifically, the old Navy Yard property. Blackwood Enterprises wants it for luxury condos, but they needed to make sure no one else had a better proposal for sustainable, mixed-income housing. Your design would have one, hands down. Emma's mind raced. That's why they needed to discredit me. But how did they get my designs? James's expression darkened. Alexander Pierce isn't just dating Victoria, he's been working with her father for months. The merger is just a cover for something bigger. I've been investigating them, but I need help from someone who knows the inside story. Why are you telling me this? Because, James leaned forward, his voice intense, I'm putting together a proposal for the Navy Yard property. Not through Crawford Development, this is independent. I want to use your designs, Emma. The real ones, not the watered-down version that got leaked. And I want you to lead the project. Emma's heart pounded. This was bigger than personal revenge, this was about her life's work, about making a real difference in Charleston. But could she trust James Crawford? The man who'd walked away from his family's millions to build affordable housing had his own complicated history with Charleston's elite. As if reading her thoughts, James added softly, I know what it's like to be betrayed by the people you thought you could trust. To have everything you worked for threatened because you didn't play by their rules. But sometimes, that's exactly what makes you dangerous to them. Emma looked out the cafe window at the historic streets of Charleston, the city she loved, the city that had just tried to break her. In the reflection of the glass, she caught a glimpse of herself, shoulders straight, chin up, a new fire in her eyes. When do we start? She asked. James grinned. First, we need to talk to your grandmother. Margaret Harrison isn't just a retired social worker, she used to be on the City Planning Commission. And she knows things about the Navy Yard property that the Blackwoods would kill to keep quiet. As they left the cafe, neither of them noticed the man across the street, speaking quietly into his phone. Within hours, Alexander Pierce would know that Emma Harrison wasn't leaving Charleston quietly after all. The game was about to change, and this time, Emma wasn't playing by anyone's rules but her own. That evening, as Emma sat in her grandmother's Victorian mansion on Murray Boulevard, surrounded by old photographs and even older secrets, she realized that her story of betrayal was just one thread in a much larger tapestry of power, corruption, and redemption. And somewhere in that tapestry was the key to not just her comeback, but to changing Charleston itself. Margaret Harrison's hands trembled slightly as she unlocked an antique cedar chest in her study. The room, with its dark wood paneling and centuries-old portraits of Harrison ancestors, felt heavy with unspoken history. Emma watched as her grandmother pulled out a weathered leather portfolio, its contents yellowed with age. I never told you the whole truth about your parents' accident, Emma. Margaret's voice was barely above a whisper. It wasn't just a random tragedy on that rainy night 10 years ago. James Crawford leaned forward in his leather armchair, his expression grave. The evening light filtering through the study's stained glass windows cast mysterious patterns across his face. Your father, Robert Harrison, was a journalist, Margaret continued, spreading old newspaper clippings across her mahogany desk. He was investigating the original Navy Yard development project. The Blackwoods and the Pierces were involved back then too, but under different company names. Emma's world tilted on its axis. What are you saying, Gran? The night your parents died, your father was meeting a whistleblower, someone with proof that the Blackwoods had been dumping toxic waste at the Navy Yard site for decades. The evidence disappeared with the crash. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. I've spent years trying to piece it together, but without proof. James picked up one of the yellowed articles. This explains why Richard Blackwood was so desperate to rush through the luxury condo development. If anyone does proper environmental testing, they'll find the truth, Emma finished, her mind racing. The betrayal she'd suffered at Alexander's hands suddenly seemed like just the tip of an iceberg. But why didn't you tell me this before, Gran? Margaret's face aged 10 years in an instant. Because I was protecting you. The Blackwoods have eyes everywhere in Charleston. When Alexander Pierce started courting you, I thought maybe things had changed. That the next generation might be different. She reached for Emma's hand. I should have warned you. A sharp knock at the front door made them all jump. Sarah burst into the study moments later, her face flushed with urgency. Emma, you need to see this. She thrust her tablet forward, displaying a breaking news article. Morrison and Associates announces merger with Pierce Industries Architecture Division, Emma read aloud, her voice growing hollow. Effective immediately, all current projects will be, no. She looked up at James. They're stealing everything. All my designs, all my work. There's more, Sarah scrolled down. Alexander Pierce has been named Chief Innovation Officer of the merged companies. And guess what their first major project is? The Navy Yard development, James growled. They're moving faster than we thought. Emma felt the room spin. Everything she'd worked for was being stripped away, piece by piece. But as she looked at her grandmother's face, lined with years of carrying this burden alone, something hardened inside her. Show me everything, she demanded, turning to Margaret. Every article, every piece of evidence Dad collected. There has to be something we can use. For the next several hours, they pored over Robert Harrison's investigation. The pieces began to form a disturbing pattern: mysterious illnesses in neighborhoods near the Navy Yard, unexplained fires that destroyed records, key witnesses who suddenly left town. Look at this, Sarah pointed to a name that kept appearing in the margins of Robert's notes. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, Environmental Science Department at Charleston University. She was doing soil studies at the Navy Yard right before your father's accident. James pulled out his phone. She's still there. In fact, she just received a major grant from Crawford Development. He looked up with a slight smile. My cousin Thomas may have kicked me out of the family business, but I still have access to certain information. We need to talk to her, Emma declared, but James held up a hand. Not here. Not now. The Blackwoods will be watching you even more closely after today's announcement. He scribbled something on a piece of paper. Meet me at this address tomorrow at noon. And Emma, be careful. You're not the only one they've tried to silence. As if to emphasize his point, a sleek black car rolled slowly past Margaret's house, its tinted windows reflecting the last rays of sunset. They all instinctively stepped back from the windows. After James left, Sarah insisted on staying the night. As they got ready for bed in Emma's old room, preserved exactly as it had been in her teenage years, Sarah finally asked the question that had been hanging in the air. Are you sure about this, Em? Going up against the Blackwoods and the Pierces, it's not just your career on the line anymore. Emma stood at her childhood window, looking out at Charleston's historic skyline. The city she loved had been built on secrets and lies, but also on the dreams of people who refused to be broken. They didn't just betray me, Sarah. They betrayed this whole city. My father died trying to expose the truth. She turned to her friend, her voice steady. I'm not running to New York. I'm staying right here and finishing what my father started. Later that night, unable to sleep, Emma found herself back in the study. As she re-examined her father's notes, a small envelope fell from between the pages. Inside was a key and a cryptic note in her father's handwriting: Safety Deposit Box Number 647, First Charleston Bank. For Emma, when the time comes. Her hands shaking, Emma realized that her father had somehow known that one day she would need this. But before she could process this discovery, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Meet me at the Magnolia Cemetery tomorrow at sunrise. I know what really happened to your parents. Come alone. V. Emma stared at the message, her heart pounding. V for Victoria? Or someone else entirely? As she stood in her grandmother's study, surrounded by the ghosts of the past and the shadows of corruption, Emma knew she was standing on the edge of a precipice. Every choice from this moment on could either lead her closer to justice or deeper into danger. Outside, thunder rolled across Charleston's sky, promising a storm that would wash away the old and usher in the new. Emma Harrison, the girl who had once believed in fairy tale romances, was gone. In her place stood a woman who understood that sometimes the greatest love story isn't about finding Prince Charming, it's about finding the strength to fight for the truth, no matter the cost. Tomorrow would bring either answers or more questions, but one thing was certain: the real battle for Charleston's soul was just beginning, and Emma was ready to fight. The morning mist clung to the ancient tombstones of Magnolia Cemetery like a ghostly shroud. Emma pulled her light jacket closer, her footsteps crunching on the gravel path as first light barely penetrated the canopy of Spanish moss overhead. The historic cemetery, final resting place of Charleston's most prominent families, seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. She hadn't told anyone about the mysterious text, not Sarah, not James, not even her grandmother. Something told her this meeting could change everything, and she needed to face it alone. "I was starting to think you wouldn't come," a familiar voice called from behind a marble angel statue. But it wasn't Victoria Blackwood who stepped out of the shadows. It was Claire Pierce, Alexander's sister. Emma's breath caught. Claire had always been the family rebel, disappearing from Charleston's social scene months ago after a public falling out with her brother. Now here she stood, looking nothing like the polished socialite Emma remembered. Her designer clothes had been replaced by jeans and a simple black sweater, her normally perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. "Why did you call me here, Claire?" "Because I can't live with the guilt anymore." Claire's hands shook as she pulled a USB drive from her pocket. "I was there the night your parents died, Emma. I was just 16, in the car with my father when he..." She choked back a sob. "When he ran them off the road." The world seemed to tilt beneath Emma's feet. "What?" "Your father had proof, real proof, about the toxic waste dumping. But it wasn't just the Blackwoods. The Pierces, my family, we were all involved. Dad knew Robert Harrison was meeting his source that night. He said he just wanted to scare him, to get the evidence." Claire's voice broke. "I've spent 10 years trying to forget the sound of their car going over that bridge." Emma felt bile rise in her throat. "And Alexander? Did he know when he seduced you?" Claire's laugh was bitter. "He knew everything. That's why Dad pushed him to get close to you, to make sure you never discovered the truth about your parents. But then Victoria Blackwood made him a better offer." Before Emma could process this horrific revelation, a twig snapped nearby. Claire's eyes widened in fear. "Someone's coming. Take this." She thrust the USB drive into Emma's hands. "Everything's on here, documents, photos, proof of what they did. But Emma, be careful. They'll kill to keep this quiet." Just like... A gunshot cracked through the morning silence. Claire crumpled forward, red blooming across her black sweater. Emma caught her as she fell, lowering her to the damp ground between the graves. "Run," Claire gasped, her eyes already growing dim. "Don't trust." Her last breath came out as a whisper, taking her secrets with her. Emma's survival instincts kicked in. She sprinted through the cemetery, her heart pounding in her ears. Behind her, footsteps pursued. She cut through a row of mausoleums, circled back, and finally broke through the cemetery's rear gate onto a quiet street. She ran 6 blocks before finally stopping, ducking into the doorway of an old church. Her hands were covered in Claire's blood. In her pocket, the USB drive felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. With trembling fingers, she pulled out her phone and dialed James Crawford's number. "Emma? What's wrong?" "Claire Pierce is dead." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant and hollow. "They shot her. In the cemetery. She told me everything. About my parents. About Alexander. James, I need help." "Where are you?" "St. Michael's Church." "Stay there." "I'm coming." "And Emma? Don't trust anyone else." Those words echoed Claire's final warning. Emma leaned against the cold stone of the church, her mind racing. Who could she trust? Sarah? Her grandmother? Even James Crawford had secrets of his own. 20 minutes later, James's black Range Rover pulled up. He took one look at her blood-stained clothes and cursed softly. "Get in. We need to get you somewhere safe." As they drove through Charleston's awakening streets, Emma told him everything Claire had revealed. James listened in grim silence. "We need to get that USB drive to someone who can protect the information," he finally said. "I have a contact at the FBI's Charleston field office." "No." Emma's voice was firm. "Claire died giving me this information. I need to know what's on it first." James glanced at her, concern evident in his green eyes. "It's not safe to view it at your apartment or my office. They'll be watching both places." "Then where?" He was quiet for a moment. "I know somewhere. But once we go down this road, Emma, there's no turning back. Are you sure you're ready for what we might find?" Emma looked out at the city she'd grown up in, the place she'd once thought she understood. Behind the beautiful antebellum facades and genteel manners lay decades of corruption and murder. Her parents had died trying to expose the truth. Now Claire Pierce had died doing the same. "I'm ready," she said, gripping the USB drive in her pocket. "Take me there." James turned the car toward the outskirts of town, toward an industrial area near the old Navy Yard. As they drove, Emma's phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "We need to talk." "About Claire." "About everything. Please, Emma. For old time's sake." She showed the message to James, who frowned. "He's trying to draw you out. Whatever's on that drive has them scared." Emma started to respond, but another text came through, this one from Sarah, 911. "Your grandmother's house was just broken into. She's okay but shaken up. Where are you?" "They're moving fast," James muttered, accelerating through a yellow light. "They know Claire told you something. We need to." He never finished the sentence. A black SUV ran the red light, slamming into the passenger side of James's Range Rover. The world spun in a symphony of shattering glass and screaming metal. Emma felt James's arm shoot out across her chest, holding her back as the airbags deployed. When the world stopped spinning, she tasted blood in her mouth. James was unconscious, slumped over the steering wheel. Through her ringing ears, she heard car doors opening, footsteps approaching. With trembling hands, she pulled the USB drive from her pocket and slipped it into her bra. Then she forced her door open and stumbled out onto the pavement. A figure approached through the settling dust, tall, familiar. "Oh, Emma," Alexander Pierce's voice was almost gentle. "Why couldn't you just leave well enough alone?" Behind him, Victoria Blackwood emerged from the black SUV, her perfect composure intact despite having just orchestrated a car crash. "We really didn't want it to come to this, darling. But you're just like your father, you never know when to stop digging." Emma straightened up, tasting blood and fury. "You're right about one thing," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I am just like my father. And I'm going to finish what he started." She heard sirens in the distance, too late to help, but maybe just in time to witness whatever was about to happen next. As Alexander stepped toward her, Emma Harrison prepared herself for the fight of her life, knowing that somewhere in this city, the truth about everything was waiting to be uncovered. She just had to survive long enough to find it. The emergency room at Charleston Memorial Hospital buzzed with controlled chaos as Emma sat on the edge of a hospital bed, refusing to lie down despite the doctor's orders. Her body ached from the crash, but her mind was crystal clear. In the confusion following the accident, she'd managed to keep the USB drive hidden, even as Alexander and Victoria were forced to retreat by the arrival of witnesses and first responders. James Crawford lay unconscious in the ICU, his condition stable but serious. The guilt weighed heavily on Emma's shoulders. He was there because of her, because she'd dragged him into this web of corruption and revenge. "Miss Harrison?" A tall, dark-skinned woman in a crisp FBI jacket appeared in the doorway. "I'm Special Agent Maya Rodriguez. I need to ask you a few questions about Claire Pierce's murder." Emma's heart raced. This could either be her salvation or another trap. "How do I know you're really FBI?" Agent Rodriguez's lips curved slightly. "Smart girl. Your friend Sarah Thompson called us. She's been working with our office for months, tracking financial irregularities at Pierce Industries. She's the one who first flagged the suspicious patterns around your parents' accident. The revelation hit Emma like a physical blow. Sarah, her best friend since college, had been investigating all along? Before she could process this, Sarah herself burst into the room, still wearing her accounting firm's business suit, her face streaked with tears. "Emma, I'm so sorry I couldn't tell you," Sarah rushed to her side. "When I took the job at Williams & Cooper last year, I started noticing discrepancies in the Pierce Industries accounts I was auditing. Then I found the connection to your parents' case, but I needed proof before I could come forward." Agent Rodriguez closed the door. "Miss Harrison, we believe Claire Pierce was about to provide that proof. Did she give you anything before she died?" Emma touched her chest where the USB drive was still hidden. Everything hinged on this moment, her instincts, her judgment, her ability to read people. She looked at Sarah, saw the years of friendship and loyalty in her eyes, then turned to Agent Rodriguez. "Yes," she said finally. "But I need guarantees. Not just for my safety, but for my grandmother's. And James Crawford's." "Already taken care of," Rodriguez replied. "We have agents at your grandmother's house, and Mr. Crawford is under protection in the ICU. Now, show me what Claire gave you." Emma reached into her hospital gown and pulled out the drive. As Rodriguez inserted it into a secure laptop, Sarah gripped Emma's hand. The files that appeared made all three women gasp. Photographs, documents, email chains, decades of evidence meticulously gathered by Claire Pierce. There were chemical analysis reports showing toxic contamination at the Navy Yard, copies of bribes paid to city officials, and most damning of all, security camera footage from the night of the accident that killed Emma's parents. "This is enough to bring down both families," Rodriguez breathed. "The Pierces, the Blackwoods, they'll all face federal charges." But Emma was staring at something else, a folder labeled Project Phoenix. Inside were architectural plans, but not for luxury condos. The Blackwood-Pierce merger wasn't just about maintaining power, they were planning to turn the Navy Yard into a massive chemical processing plant, hidden behind a facade of upscale development. They're not just covering up past crimes, Emma realized. They're planning new ones. Bigger ones. The environmental impact would be catastrophic. A commotion in the hallway made them all jump. Through the window, Emma saw Alexander Pierce arguing with hospital security, Victoria Blackwood at his side. Their eyes met across the distance, and Emma saw something she'd never seen before in Alexander's face: fear. "We need to move you," Rodriguez decided. "Now. There's a safe house." "No," Emma cut her off. "I'm done hiding. It's time to fight back." She turned to Sarah. "You said you work with their accounts. How quickly can you get me access to their financial records?" Sarah's eyes widened. "Emma, what are you planning?" "Something my father never had the chance to do. We're going to take them down from the inside." She looked at Agent Rodriguez. "You have enough to arrest them, but a good lawyer could tie this up in courts for years. I want more than arrests, I want them exposed. I want everyone to see who they really are." Rodriguez studied her thoughtfully. "What exactly did you have in mind?" Emma's plan poured out of her, a combination of architectural expertise, insider knowledge, and sheer audacity. They would need James's help once he recovered, and her grandmother's connections on the city council. But most of all, they would need the element of surprise. "Give me 48 hours before you move on the arrests," she urged Rodriguez. "Let me put this in motion. Trust me." The agent hesitated, then nodded slowly. 48 hours. "But you'll have a protection detail, and if anything seems off." "It won't be," Emma assured her. She turned to Sarah. "Can you get me into the Pierce Industries system?" Sarah pulled out her laptop. "Better than that. I can get you into their private servers. They never changed the admin passwords Claire gave me months ago." As Sarah worked, Emma's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Her heart stopped when she opened it. It was from James Crawford's hospital room. "I'm awake. Whatever you're planning, I'm in. Check your father's safety deposit box. J." The safety deposit box, in all the chaos, she'd almost forgotten. What final piece of the puzzle had her father left there, waiting for this exact moment? Emma, Sarah's voice broke through her thoughts. I'm in. What do you want me to do? Emma looked at the hospital room door, where security was still holding back Alexander and Victoria. Soon they would find another way in, or call their lawyers, or try to have her committed as unstable. She had 48 hours to destroy everything they'd built, to expose every lie they'd told, to finish what her father and Claire had died trying to accomplish. Start with Project Phoenix, she said, her voice steady. Download everything. Then show me every financial transaction for the past 10 years. Every shell company, every bribe, every cover-up. She met Agent Rodriguez's eyes. We're going to give them exactly what they fear most, the truth, with nowhere to hide. As Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard, Emma felt a strange calm settle over her. Alexander had taught her about power, all right, just not the lesson he'd intended. Real power wasn't in money or social status or even love. Real power was in having the courage to stand up and fight back, no matter the cost. Outside her window, Charleston's historic spires rose against the afternoon sky. Somewhere in the city, her father's final message waited in that safety deposit box. But first, she had an empire to destroy, and only 48 hours to do it. Sarah, she said, show me everything about the city council members they bought. It's time to make some calls. First Charleston Bank loomed before Emma like a Greek temple, its marble columns casting long shadows in the early morning light. Despite Agent Rodriguez's protests, she had insisted on coming here first, before executing the rest of her plan. Whatever was in her father's safety deposit box couldn't wait any longer. Sarah stood guard outside while Emma followed the bank manager to the vault. Box 647 opened with a metallic click that seemed to echo through time itself. Inside lay a single manila envelope and a small leather-bound journal. Hello, sweetheart, began the letter in her father's familiar handwriting. If you're reading this, then you've discovered what I did about the Navy Yard. But what you don't know is that your mother and I weren't the first ones they silenced. In 1983, Thomas Crawford, James's father, discovered the original contamination. He tried to stop it, to warn people. 3 days later, he died in a hunting accident, and his younger brother Richard took control of Crawford Development. Emma's hands trembled as she read on. James doesn't know this, but his father was my source. Before he died, he gave me proof, not just of the contamination, but of a much bigger conspiracy. The journal contains everything. Be careful who you trust, even among the Crawfords. Some secrets are passed down through generations. The journal contained detailed notes, photographs, and most importantly, a list of numbered Swiss bank accounts, a paper trail of corruption spanning 4 decades. But the final page made Emma's blood run cold. It wasn't just the Pierces and Blackwoods who were involved in the cover-up. There was another name, Crawford. Her phone buzzed, a text from James, out of ICU. Meeting set with City Council tomorrow morning. Everything going according to plan. Emma stared at the message, her father's warning echoing in her mind. Could she trust James? Was he truly the rebel fighting his family's corruption, or was he playing a deeper game? Before she could ponder this further, Sarah burst into the vault room. Emma, we've got trouble. Victoria Blackwood just called an emergency press conference. They're announcing the Navy Yard development project today, not next month like planned. They're forcing our timeline. Emma quickly photographed every page of the journal with her phone, then returned everything to the box. She couldn't let on that she'd found it, not yet. Not until she knew who she could really trust. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. From a secure room in the FBI field office, Emma and Sarah worked with Agent Rodriguez to set their countermoves in motion. Each piece had to be perfect, timed just right. Financial records are ready to be leaked, Sarah confirmed, her laptop screen reflecting in her determined eyes. One press of this button and every dirty deal they've ever made goes public. Wait, Emma said, studying the Project Phoenix plans they discovered. Something wasn't adding up. These environmental impact projections, they're too precise, too detailed. Someone with insider knowledge had to help create these. Someone who understood both architecture and environmental science. Rodriguez leaned in. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the professor from your father's notes. We need to talk to her, Emma decided. Now. But when they arrived at Charleston University, they found Dr. Chen's office in chaos. The environmental science professor was frantically shredding documents. Dr. Chen, Emma stepped forward. I'm Robert Harrison's daughter. The professor froze. You shouldn't be here. None of you should be here. Her eyes darted to the window. They're watching. They're always watching. We know about Project Phoenix, Emma pressed. We know you helped design it. I didn't have a choice. Chen's voice cracked. They threatened my family back in China. But I kept copies of everything. Real copies, not the doctored reports they made me submit. She pulled a hard drive from her desk. Your father, he was a good man. He didn't deserve what they did to him. A shadow fell across the doorway. No, he didn't, James Crawford said quietly. Neither did my father. Emma's heart raced as she met his eyes, searching for any sign of deception. You knew? About your father? I found out 6 months ago, James admitted. That's why I'd been working against my family. But Emma, we have a bigger problem. The press conference, it's not just about announcing the project early. He held up his phone, showing a breaking news alert. Pierce Industries announces revolutionary clean energy partnership with Chinese firm. It's a shell game, Sarah realized. They're going to claim the chemical plant is actually a green energy facility. Once they have international backing, the city council won't be able to stop it, Emma finished. And any evidence we reveal will look like corporate espionage. Dr. Chen's face had gone pale. The Chinese company, it's the same one that threatened my family. This was their plan all along. Emma felt the pieces clicking into place. We need to move now. Sarah, release the financial records. Dr. Chen, we need your real environmental reports. Agent Rodriguez. Already calling for backup, the FBI agent was on her phone. But Emma, you should know, Alexander Pierce just entered the building. As if on cue, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Emma made a split-second decision. James, get Dr. Chen to the FBI office. Sarah, start the leaks. I'll handle Alexander. Emma, no, James started to protest, but she cut him off. Trust goes both ways, she said quietly. I'm trusting you with our evidence. Now trust me to face him. After they rushed out the back exit, Emma turned to face the door. Alexander Pierce stepped into the office, as handsome and polished as ever in his tailored suit. But now she could see the cracks in his facade, the desperation in his eyes. I should have known you'd figure it all out, he said softly. You were always smarter than I gave you credit for. Was any of it real? Emma asked, surprised by how little pain the question caused now. Any part of us? Does it matter? He moved closer. Emma, it's not too late. Join us. With your architectural expertise, your father's research, we could make this work. We could be together. Emma laughed, and the sound seemed to startle him. You still don't understand. This was never about you and me. This is about justice, for my parents, for Claire, for everyone your family has hurt. And what about the Crawfords? Alexander's voice turned sharp. Did your new boyfriend tell you about his family's role in all this? About what they really have planned for the Navy Yard? Emma thought of her father's journal, of James's complicated past. At least he's trying to make things right. Is he? Alexander pulled out his phone. Maybe you should see this before you decide who to trust. But Emma had already pressed Sarah's number on her phone behind her back, sending the prearranged signal. Somewhere in the city, thousands of documents were being released to every major news outlet. On every computer in the university, the true Project Phoenix plans were appearing. And in the parking lot below, FBI agents were moving into position. No, Alexander, Emma said calmly. Maybe you should see this. She turned Dr. Chen's computer monitor toward him, showing the live stream of Victoria Blackwood's press conference, where federal agents were now walking onto the stage with arrest warrants. The look of shock on Alexander's face was almost worth everything she'd been through. Almost. "It's over," she said softly. "The only question is, will you go down with them, or will you finally tell the truth?" In the distance, sirens wailed. Time was running out for both of them. But for Emma Harrison, standing in that office where so many secrets had been kept, it felt like time was finally on her side. The next 24 hours in Charleston felt like watching an empire crumble in slow motion. Emma watched from the FBI field office as news channels played endless footage of Victoria Blackwood being led away in handcuffs, her perfect composure finally shattered. Richard Pierce, Alexander's father, had barricaded himself in his mansion, surrounded by lawyers, while federal agents executed search warrants at Pierce Industries headquarters. But Alexander's words about James Crawford haunted her. In her father's journal, which she'd kept secret from everyone but Sarah, there were hints of an even deeper conspiracy. The Crawford family's involvement wasn't just historical, there were recent transfers, shell companies, meetings in Shanghai that lined up perfectly with Project Phoenix's timeline. "Emma," Sarah rushed into the room, her laptop clutched to her chest. "You need to see this. I've been tracing the money trail from those Swiss accounts in your father's journal. The deposits didn't stop after Thomas Crawford's death. They continued, through a series of offshore accounts, right up until 3 months ago." Emma leaned in to look at the screen. Who was making the deposits? That's the thing, they were authorized by 2 people jointly. James Crawford and your grandmother. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. What? That's impossible. Gran's been helping us expose them. Has she? Sarah pulled up another document. Look at these property records. Margaret Harrison has been quietly buying up land around the Navy Yard through various shell companies. All the purchases line up with Project Phoenix's expansion plans. Before Emma could process this betrayal, Agent Rodriguez burst in. "We've got a problem. James Crawford just called an emergency meeting of the City Council. He's presenting a modified version of Project Phoenix, claiming it's a clean energy initiative that will heal the wounds of the past. He's trying to salvage the plan," Emma realized. All this time, he wasn't working against his family. He was positioning himself to take control once the Pierces and Blackwoods fell. Her phone buzzed, a text from her grandmother, "Meet me at the house." "I can explain everything." Emma showed the message to Rodriguez. "It's a trap," the agent warned. "Probably," Emma agreed. "But I need to know why." "Sarah, is the final phase of our plan ready?" Sarah nodded grimly. "Dr. Chen's complete environmental report is set to go live at your signal. Once it does, no one will be able to spin Project Phoenix as anything but what it is, an environmental catastrophe waiting to happen." Emma stood, straightening her shoulders. "Then it's time to finish this. Agent Rodriguez, I need a favor." 20 minutes later, Emma walked up the path to her grandmother's historic mansion. The garden where she'd played as a child, where she'd sought comfort after her parents' death, now felt like enemy territory. Margaret Harrison waited on the veranda, elegant as ever in her pearl necklace and tailored dress. "I know about the Swiss accounts," Emma said without preamble. "I know you've been working with the Crawfords all along. To protect you," Margaret's voice was fierce. "Everything I did was to protect you. By working with the people who killed my parents. By trying to control the damage." Margaret's composure cracked. "Your father was going to expose everything. Do you know what that would have meant? Not just for the Pierces and Blackwoods, but for all of Charleston. Thousands of jobs lost, property values destroyed, families ruined. I tried to convince him to be reasonable, to work within the system." Emma felt sick. "You knew. That night, you knew they were going to stop him. I thought they would just talk to him. I never imagined." Margaret's hands trembled. "Afterward, I made a deal. The Crawfords would help me protect you, set up a trust fund for your future. All I had to do was help manage certain aspects of their business. Like buying land for their toxic waste dump? Like helping them pretend to be the good guys while they poisoned our city? Emma, please. James has a new vision for Project Phoenix. Clean energy, real environmental restoration. We can make it right. It's too late for that. Emma pulled out her phone. Sarah, do it. Across the city, Dr. Chen's full report was releasing to every news outlet, every environmental agency, every social media platform. Simultaneously, every screen in the city council chamber where James was making his presentation suddenly displayed the truth: decades of environmental data, leaked emails, and surveillance footage showing the real plans for Project Phoenix. What have you done? Margaret whispered. What my father would have done. What you should have done. Emma's voice broke. How could you, Gran? How could you look me in the eye all these years, knowing what they did to Mom and Dad? Because she thought she was protecting the city's legacy, James Crawford said from the doorway. He looked different now, harder, colder. Just like my father thought he was protecting our family's legacy when he tried to stop the original dumping. But he was weak, just like your father was weak. Sometimes legacy requires sacrifice. And what's your excuse? Emma demanded. Pretending to help me while you were planning to take over the whole operation? I wasn't pretending. James stepped closer. Everything I felt for you was real. That's why I'm giving you one last chance, Emma. Join me. We can rebuild Project Phoenix the right way. The right way? Emma laughed bitterly. There is no right way to profit from destroying people's lives. Then you leave me no choice. James pulled out a gun. The environmental report can be discredited. Technical glitch, corporate espionage, but you? You're just like your father. A problem that needs to be solved. You won't shoot me, Emma said calmly. Because in about 30 seconds, every word of this conversation will be broadcast live across Charleston. Isn't that right, Agent Rodriguez? FBI agents emerged from the shadows of the garden. James spun around, but it was too late. As he was led away in handcuffs, Emma turned to her grandmother. I loved you, she said simply. And I forgive you. But you're going to tell the truth, all of it. You owe my parents that much. Margaret seemed to age decades in moments. You're right. I do. She looked at Agent Rodriguez. I'm ready to make my statement. As the sun set over Charleston, Emma stood in the garden where she'd grown up, where so many secrets had been buried. Sarah appeared beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. What now? Her friend asked softly. Emma looked at her phone, where Alexander's last text still waited. Meet me at the Navy Yard. There's something you need to know. Now, Emma said, we finish this. Once and for all. She walked down the garden path, leaving behind the house where she'd been sheltered by lies. Ahead lay one final confrontation, one last truth to uncover. The sun painted Charleston's spires in shades of gold and shadow, a city poised between its past and its future. And Emma Harrison, the architect's daughter who had brought down an empire, walked toward her destiny with her head held high. The Navy Yard loomed before Emma in the gathering dusk, its abandoned warehouses casting long shadows across the contaminated ground. Despite Agent Rodriguez's protests, she had insisted on meeting Alexander alone. Some stories needed to end where they began. Sarah's voice crackled through her hidden earpiece. FBI teams are in position around the perimeter. If anything goes wrong, it won't, Emma assured her, though her heart raced as she approached Warehouse 7, where it had all started, where her father had arranged to meet his source on that fatal night 10 years ago. Alexander waited inside, his silhouette framed by the dying sunlight streaming through broken windows. He'd shed his usual polished appearance, his suit was rumpled, his hair disheveled. But his eyes, those eyes that had once made her believe in fairy tales, were clearer than she'd ever seen them. I knew you'd come, he said softly. You're just like him, you know. Your father. He couldn't walk away either, not when he was so close to the truth. And what truth is that, Alexander? That you and your family are criminals? That you murdered people to protect your profits? The truth about why. He ran a hand through his hair. Did you ever wonder why your father came to that meeting alone? Why he didn't bring backup, didn't tell anyone except your grandmother where he was going? Emma's breath caught. What are you talking about? He came alone because the source he was meeting was his wife. Your mother. Alexander pulled out an old photograph from his jacket. Elizabeth Harrison wasn't just a social worker. She was an environmental scientist working undercover at Pierce Industries. She discovered the original contamination data, but she needed Robert's journalism skills to expose it. Emma took the photograph with trembling hands. Her mother stood in this very warehouse, younger than Emma remembered her, holding documents and looking determined. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I found this in my father's safe after his arrest." He handed her a USB drive. "It's security footage from that night. Your parents weren't just silenced because of what they knew. They were silenced because of what they were about to do." Emma plugged the drive into her phone. The grainy footage showed her parents meeting in this warehouse, but they weren't alone. A younger Margaret Harrison was there, along with Thomas Crawford and Richard Pierce. "They were all here," Emma whispered. "The night it happened. Your parents had developed a plan to clean up the Navy Yard, to turn it into something that could actually help people. Affordable housing, green spaces, clean energy, everything you designed in your Thompson Prize submission. They had the funding, the permits, everything ready to go. But it would have exposed decades of corruption. So they killed them." Emma's voice cracked. "Their own daughter and son-in-law. Your grandmother tried to stop it. That's why she made the deal afterward, to protect you, yes, but also to try to make their dream happen another way. Project Phoenix was supposed to be that dream, twisted by greed and corruption." Emma stared at him. "Why didn't you tell me this before? When we were together?" Alexander's laugh was hollow. "Because I was a coward. Because I thought I could protect you by keeping you close, by making you fall in love with me. I told myself I was different from my father, that I could change things from the inside. But in the end, I was just another link in the chain of lies. And now? Why tell me this now? Because you did what they couldn't. You exposed everything, destroyed everything. And because..." He swallowed hard. "Because I really did fall in love with you, Emma. Not part of the plan, believe me." Before she could respond, shouting erupted outside. Through the broken windows, they saw police lights and heard Agent Rodriguez's voice on a megaphone. "Alexander Pierce, we have the building surrounded. Come out with your hands up." "I'm not running," he said quietly. "I'm going to testify against all of them, my father, Victoria, everyone. It's time for the truth." "The whole truth?" Emma pressed. "About my parents?" "Everything." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. "These are the original plans your parents created for the Navy Yard. Their vision for what this place could be. Take them. Make it happen. It's yours now, all of it." Emma took the envelope, feeling its weight, the weight of history, of legacy, of truth. "You'll go to prison. I know. It's where I belong." He smiled sadly. "Maybe in another life, another time, we could have." "No," Emma cut him off gently. "We couldn't. Because I'm my parents' daughter. And you're your father's son. We were always going to end up here." As FBI agents swarmed the warehouse, Emma watched Alexander being led away. She opened the envelope, spreading the old blueprints across a dusty crate. Her parents' handwriting filled the margins, notes, dreams, hopes for a better future. Sarah appeared beside her, followed by Agent Rodriguez. "The DA is offering your grandmother a deal in exchange for her testimony," the agent said. "James Crawford and the others will face federal charges." "And this place?" Sarah gestured at the decaying warehouse. "What happens to it now?" Emma looked at her parents' plans, then at her own Thompson Prize designs. They were remarkably similar, proof that some dreams refuse to die, that truth finds its way to the light. "Now," she said, "we build something new. Something honest. Together." 6 months later. The sun shone brightly on the crowd gathered at the Navy Yard. Where toxic waste had once seeped into the ground, construction crews were breaking ground on the Harrison Crawford Memorial Park and Community Center. Emma stood at the podium, her grandmother in the front row, frail but free after her testimony had helped convict the conspirators. "My parents had a dream for this place," Emma addressed the crowd. a dream that cost them their lives. But dreams don't die with the dreamers. They live on in the hearts of those who dare to believe in something better. She looked out at the faces before her, Sarah, beaming proudly, Agent Rodriguez, who had become a friend, Dr. Chen, finally free to teach the truth about environmental science, and hundreds of Charleston citizens ready for change. This project isn't just about cleaning up contamination or building new homes. It's about cleaning up the corruption that poisoned our city's soul. It's about building trust where there were only secrets. It's about love, not the kind that blinds us to truth, but the kind that gives us courage to face it. In his prison cell, Alexander Pierce watched the groundbreaking ceremony on TV. He smiled sadly, took out a pen, and began to write his full confession. In her office at the newly established Harrison Environmental Justice Foundation, Emma hung her parents' photograph next to her architectural license. Their dreams had become her blueprint, their courage her foundation. She was no longer the naive girl who had believed in fairy tale romances. She was something better, a woman who believed in truth, in justice, and in the power of love to transform even the darkest places into something beautiful. Outside her window, Charleston's spires rose against the blue sky, a city healing, changing, growing. And Emma Harrison, the architect's daughter who had brought down an empire of lies and built something true in its place, smiled at her reflection in the glass. She was, at last, exactly where she was meant to be.